I want to talk about different ways that a person can misunderstand their own emotion. I want to explain that when we look at this from a theoretical point of view, there are 4 basic ways that we can misunderstand an emotion. Once we understand those 4 ways, we can combine them and look at hybrid ways and complex ways that we can misunderstand an emotion. But there are 4 basic ways of doing it. First, I want to talk about how we are supposed to understand an emotional state. When you experience an emotion, you display a particular emotional behaviour. And when I do it, I do the same thing. We can understand, or we should understand, that your behaviour and my behaviour are the same, and that behaviour tends to be triggered by this particular stimulus. So in the case of anger, your anger behaviour should be the same as my anger behaviour, and we should both be angry when we encounter this particular set of circumstances. When we have that common understanding, we can have a word for it. We can use the word anger. Anger is an emotion that you feel and I feel when we display a particular form of behaviour, and we can understand that that occurs in certain sets of circumstances. That's how it's supposed to work. When that stops working is when either you or I are performing tactical deception with that particular form of behaviour. So I want to explain that there are 4 ways that we can misunderstand an emotion, because the 2 forms of tactical deception that either of us can do are we can affect the behaviour. That means that we pretend the emotional behaviour in the absence of the stimulus that normally causes it. The other thing we can do is we can suppress the behaviour. That means that we blank the behaviour when those circumstances are present. The circumstances are present, we might feel the emotion, but we choose to suppress the emotional behavioural response for whatever reason. So we've got 2 ways that we can do it: affectation and suppression. Then the reason that there are 4 basic ways that we can misunderstand it is because it also depends upon who it is that is doing that. Either I am doing it, or for the purposes of this analysis, we can say that everybody is doing it. And then obviously we can look at circumstances in between those 2. Let's talk first of all about the affectation of emotional behaviour. We discussed that you and I should display anger behaviour when a particular set of circumstances arises. We can give a name for that. We can call that the biological stimulus. So I perform or I display a particular emotional behaviour in conjunction with a particular set of circumstances if I'm behaving naturally. So the emotion is supposed to be caused by the biological stimulus. If I'm affecting the emotional behaviour, I'm doing so for a particular reason. I'm doing so because I'm trying to achieve something, or because I have a learned response. But I don't do that all the time. I do that when a different set of circumstances arises. And we can give that different set of circumstances a name. We call it the affectation stimulus. So when I display an emotion naturally, I do so because of the presence of the biological stimulus. When I pretend an emotional behaviour, I do so because of the presence of the affectation stimulus. Over time, what tends to happen is that if my affectation of that emotional behaviour becomes a learned response, or it becomes a response to a repeating set of circumstances that means that I do it commonly or often, then over time, what will happen is that the affectation stimulus will come to seem like it is a natural cause of the emotional state. So in very simple terms, the affectation of emotional behaviour causes me to misunderstand the causes of my own emotional states. Let's talk now about who is doing this, because either I am doing it in isolation, or we could say that everybody is doing it. When everybody is doing it, then it becomes universally understood that an emotion is caused by a particular set of circumstances. So let's give an example of this. If you live in a society where cricket is part of the culture, then people will feel under pressure to act as if they're enjoying themselves when they're at a cricket match. If you come from a different culture, people will do that for a different trigger. This gives us some basis for understanding the mechanism behind a culture, because in one society, everybody will feel pressure to act that way in the presence of cricket, and in another society, they'll feel under pressure to act that way in the presence of baseball. So you are affecting that behaviour because you want to become a part of your society, and therefore it becomes like a snowball that gathers momentum. Everybody does it together. So in a society where everybody performs an emotional behaviour in response to a particular stimulus, it will come to seem like that stimulus is the natural cause of that emotion. This could be true of anxiety, happiness, loneliness, anything. If you have a collective emotional manipulation or an affectation that results from a set of circumstances. Let's assume now that I'm just doing it on my own. We could have a world in which everyone is responding to a particular stimulus in a natural way. That means that they only demonstrate that emotional behaviour in response to the biological stimulus. I have trained myself or have been taught to affect that behaviour because I was trained to do that in my childhood, or because it became a coping strategy. So I am now affecting an emotional behaviour differently to how other people do it. Now, my understanding of my emotion is different from how I understand other people to behave. So I might have a correct understanding of the emotion in other people, but I might understand that that emotion is caused in me by a special set of circumstances. So we've either got a collective misunderstanding of the cause of an emotion. Everybody thinks that an emotion is caused by this affectation stimulus, or I see my emotions differently to other people. Other people may be happy in this set of circumstance, but I'm happy in a different set of circumstances. So my understanding of my emotions has become divorced from that of other people. Before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about the feeling, because you might think, yes, but if you're affecting the behaviour, you'll notice the feeling isn't there. But actually, that's an illusion, because I can't compare my feelings with your feelings. So if my feeling is absent, I have no way of knowing whether that feeling is present in you or not. If I'm habitually affecting an emotion, then I will think that I'm experiencing that emotion even in the absence of the behaviour. Because if I'm doing it all the time, then the absence of the feeling isn't going to seem odd to me. It's going to be part of, this is an emotion that doesn't come with a feeling. And why would that seem abnormal to me if I was affecting the behaviour all the time? Let's talk now about suppression of behaviour. I know that you experience an emotion because you display the behaviour. You know that I experience an emotion because I display the behaviour. If one of us is suppressing the behaviour, then we lose the ability to identify the emotion in either ourselves or in the other person. So we've got these two situations to think about. Either I'm doing it in isolation, or everyone is doing it. If everyone is doing it, and an example of this could be the general tendency in Asian cultures to suppress anger behaviour. Another example is, in Britain, we have this thing called the stiff upper lip, which when you think about it really is a portfolio of emotional suppression. So then you have plausible scenarios where everybody will suppress an emotion together. When that happens, you have a universal derecognition of the occurrence of that emotional state. When I'm doing it individually, then there is a presumption that other people are doing it normally. So I'm going to have a recognition of that emotion in other people, but I don't have the ability to recognize the emotion in myself. You might think that I would notice the feeling, but I don't know what the feeling relates to. I cannot compare my feeling with yours, so I have this feeling, but how do I know what it is? I don't know this feeling is anger or sadness or loneliness. It could be any of those things, or it could be nothing, or it could be just that I've caught a cold or whatever. So when everybody suppresses the emotional behavior, we have a universal derecognition of the occurrence of that emotional state. When I'm doing it in isolation, I have a recognition of the emotion in society in general, but an inability to understand that I experience it. So let's put this into the context of the real world. We've discussed that from a theoretical point of view, there are 4 ways that you can misunderstand an emotion. I affect an emotion, everyone affects an emotion, emotional behavior. I suppress emotional behavior, everyone suppresses emotional behavior. Those correspond to a universal inability to understand the correct cause of an emotion, or I understand the cause of an emotion in me as being different to everyone else, or we have a universal derecognition of the occurrence of an emotion, or I recognize the emotion generally in society, but I don't understand that I experience it myself. 4 different ways. Now, the real world is not like that, because in the real world, he is affecting an emotion for a particular affectation stimulus, and she is affecting an emotion for a different affectation stimulus, and he is suppressing the emotion in some circumstances, but maybe not all. And then, of course, there's what I'm doing. So my real understanding of my emotion is going to be some sort of blended mishmash of all of these people going together. But we have to recognize that there is like a hierarchy in terms of how I actually understand my emotional state. The most important thing is, what do I do? Am I affecting that emotion, or am I suppressing it? The second thing is, what does my family do? Did I come from a family in which people thought it was proper to suppress anger behavior, or to pretend to be happy, or to pretend to like people? So that's the second most important thing. What did my family do? And then the third most important thing is, what is prevalent in the culture in which I live? Do I live in a culture where people think that you're a loser if you don't pretend to be happy all the time? Or they discourage you, or they tease you or make fun of you if you display anxiety or you appear to be lonely? So you've got this hierarchy. What do I do? What does my family do? What does my society do? And then what does my peer groups do? Your actual understanding of an emotion is like a blended average of all of that. But to understand it, we have to grasp that there are 4 core elements. I affect, they affect. I suppress, they suppress. And the way you actually understand your emotion is going to be a blended average of all of that, not forgetting that in that mix, there is what I call authentic emotional behavior, which is people displaying an emotional behavior because they experience an emotion naturally. They are responding to a natural occurrence and responding to it authentically. So that's just a summary. Like, we're looking at it from a theoretical point of view. From a theoretical point of view, we have to break down into binary possibilities. And once we understand the consequences of those binary possibilities, then we can combine those in probabilistic ways and recognize that our actual understanding of our emotional state is a fuzzy amalgam of 4 different forms of misunderstanding. Thank you. That's all I want to say today.